Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's panel on digital sovereignty during wartime. This is a panel organized by the Law and Internet Foundation together with the Acting Project. So the Law and Internet Foundation, we're a Bulgarian NGO working in the fields of law and technologies. We work on many different projects connected with this. And the Acting Project is one of those. More specifically, the Acting Project, or the Advanced European Platform and Network of Cybersecurity Training and Exercise Centers, aims to develop a network of advanced and interconnected ranges of cybersecurity training. And this is particularly relevant for today's discussion, as contemporary conflicts increasingly depend on digital infrastructures. This could be cloud systems, satellite communications, artificial intelligence, cyber defense mechanisms, and many more. And those are no longer only connected to warfare. They're central to military capability, public administration, and even societal resilience. And this raises a very important question. Can the European Union strategically remain autonomous if those infrastructures on which it depends are controlled externally or by private actors? Today, we will discuss those important questions together with our panelists. Unfortunately, one of them got sick, so he cannot be able to join today's panel, José, but he is okay, but I will be covering for that. And on my side here, I have Professor George Dimitrov, then we have Professor Guy Banem, and then we have my colleague Polina Petrova, which will briefly introduce themselves, and then we will start with our questions. So please.
They all work. Thanks to everyone. Nice to see so many people interested in this beautiful area, digital sovereignty. My name is George Dimitrov. I am professor in technologies and law. I have advised different governments in the area of Southeast Europe on the drafting and implementation of legislation related to information technologies, and also being part of creating strategies for IT in different sectors, including cybersecurity, digital identity, e-commerce, communications, etc. So I'll be very much happy to touch point about this beautiful topic. Professor?
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Guy Banem, and I'm a visiting professor at the College of Europe teaching EU and peace mediation. I'm also part of a collective called Build Up, which is a digital peace-building organization. When I intervene, I'll explain to you a bit more what do I mean by digital peace-building, but essentially Build Up, we work at the intersection between peace builders who want to use tech in order to secure their goals, and we work with tech platforms on how can you build and design tech that would be sensitive to the needs of peace.
Hello, everyone. My name is Polina Petrova, and actually that was supposed to be me. So I'm still in a slight cognitive dissonance during the last 1 hour or so, because I believe that today I was going to be the moderator, but actually I'm here instead of and representing José, of course, not having his deep expertise in the field, but I can still assure you that we are going to conduct a very nice and lovely interdisciplinary discussion today with all our distinguished panelists that have already introduced themselves. Yes, I'm one of Law and Internet Foundation's legal and ethics expert in new technologies, and I'm very happy to be here and to see so many of you having joined us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for introducing themselves. I just wanted to say that this discussion is going to last until 3, and then we're going to have a Q&A session in which you can ask all the questions that you want to ask and that are interesting for you. And now we're going to move on with the first question of our panel, which is namely, why is European digital sovereignty especially critical in times of war? And now I'm opening the floor for discussions. So please, jump in and...
Yeah. Okay. I can start with the flight. This question is actually very interesting and very, I'd say, actual in these times, because even we're in a modern world, still wars are ongoing everywhere, close to us. Ukraine, Iran, well, in many parts of the world, there are always conflicts. And digital sovereignty becomes existential during such time of war because, let's be fair, the modern conflicts are no longer fought on land. They are, or sea, or air. Well, they are, but nowadays they are also fought in the cyberspace, as part of data infrastructure and attacks on data infrastructure, communication networks, and digital platforms. So Europe's governments, economies, energy systems, banking systems, banking infrastructure, payment infrastructure, healthcare, military coordination, everything depends on technologies. That's nowadays the reality. If these systems are controlled or excessively dependent on external actors, then Europe will become strategically vulnerable. That's the reality. So the war in Ukraine demonstrated that this very, very clearly. Cyber attacks can target critical infrastructure. Disinformation can destabilize the economies and the democracies. Satellite and cloud services, they now become a strategic asset. Digital resilience becomes part of the national defense. So digital sovereignty, therefore, means ensuring that Europe can securely operate critical infrastructure and basic infrastructures, protect sensitive data, maintains trusted communications, and preserve democratic decision-making even during crises, but not to the detriment of human values and human rights. So importantly, it's not about making Europe digitally isolated. So it's not a question of digital, how to say this term, isolation, or isolationism, if I can say so. It's about strategic autonomy and resilience, ensuring that it will remain capable of acting independently when such geopolitical conditions deteriorate. So this in a nutshell what I think. But Professor or Polly?
Yes, well, I certainly think that you have covered pretty much everything that I also wanted to say, mostly that the majority of the world is vastly operating in a context of geopolitical uncertainty, constant cyber risks, and rapid technological changes. So this all depicts pretty much the context and the importance of the topic for the entire world. But also there is another layer, I think, which adds another nuance of complexity, and this is that this current context that we live in nowadays does not even require a formal declaration of war, and examples are countless. So preparedness in this context becomes even more crucial.
Thank you so much. Professor?
So I should say, I mean, this is a very interesting panel for me because I come from a rather different discipline, if you like. Peace building is a rather different frame of reference than cyber defense. So I'll give some answers from that perspective, and I think it'll be interesting to see how you react to it. So, I mean, the question about digital sovereignty, especially in times of war, I would definitely underline the point that has been made that we see that warfare is playing out online as well as offline. We see that technological-driven vulnerabilities are exploited by conflict actors, whether we consider them to be eternal adversaries or part of our own societies in different contexts. So just to say, because in build-up we work globally, so particularly in contexts like Sudan, Somalia, Colombia, Myanmar, Afghanistan, and so on. So from our institutional perspective, the question of what do we in build-up think about European digital sovereignty is not really central to our goals. I just remember a panel yesterday morning, actually, which posed also looked at digital sovereignty, and it was quite inspiring. We had this kind of idea that, well, what is it you want to protect? And what was said during that panel was that we want to protect the freedom to choose and the autonomy that and dignity that each society should have. And for me, that resonates very strongly because what we try to do is we try to ensure that conflict-affected populations, whether you consider that at state level or intra-state level, they are, if you like, victims of the digital world which we have when it's designed in a way which there are particular digital affordances which are either exploited by adversarial actors or another proposition I'd like to just put on the table, some of the way that we see the fast and rapidly changing world of algorithmic design, technological design of platforms, and now generative AI and future feed-driven immersive experiences and so on. There is quite a lot of literature to show that some of these design features are potentially driving war and conflict as an unintended externality of the way they're designed. So this gets us out of the kind of like, oh, a state needs to defend itself against adversaries. Yes, I agree. But I would also say we also need to be thinking about the way that technology is regulated and governed in a way that these inherent vulnerabilities are neither able to be exploited nor having these kind of negative externalities which are potentially driving conflict. And then just final thing I want to say, but I can come back to, is that just as we want to be aware of how all these things are critical in a time of war, we are maybe in the dreamers brigade of like, we also want to think about how do we get to peace. So it's, of course, a very important proposition. We need to defend when we're attacked, but also we want to be very clear that when we're talking about whether it's the Digital Services Act or the AI Act, that we think that inherently war-conducive platform design or AI design should be considered a systemic risk, and we should mitigate against it, and we should potentially be thinking about banning certain types of applications if they're going to mean that we cannot get to future peace, which I would assume most people want.
Thank you so much. And indeed, I believe that the future most significant objective of this would be peace. And yes, now we know what the problem is, that digital sovereignty is something very crucial for the European Union, especially during the current times that we see, and it's a top priority. And now it's time for us to also acknowledge what the European Union has done until now. So our next question focuses exactly on this matter, and more specifically, what are the current EU efforts in addressing those matters of digital sovereignty, and what are the gaps that need to be addressed? Please. No.
Okay. Actually, the EU has already taken significant steps that I can take in towards digital sovereignty and through regulation, infrastructure initiatives, I would say cybersecurity frameworks and digital identity programs. Lots of efforts have been done. Some of the major initiatives from regulatory point of view, of course, is our beloved GDPR, which established European standards for privacy and data protection, as well as the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act, which aimed at regulating the large digital platforms, which are not European. It's the AI Act, which seeks to create trustworthy and human-centric, if I may say so, artificial intelligence. The NIS2 and the Cyber Resilient Act, which are aimed at strengthening cybersecurity obligations, duties of the actors on the market and digital resilience or cybersecurity resilience. And of course, the regulation on electronic identification and trust services, which introduced in Europe a new realm, which is called European Digital Identity Wallet, which is the foundation of a really boosted digital interaction throughout Europe, which will change the landscape of how people communicate in the most regulated services like banking, insurance, telecom, healthcare, educational, with the government or government to government. So it's one of the key pillars that will have a huge effect onto the society. So there are lots of initiatives that Europe is investing now, like the Gaia X project for cloud sovereignty, creating cloud, because the biggest cloud forms are not European. Also the chip or semiconductor capacity through the European Chips Act. And of course, there are initiatives in so-called secure connectivity infrastructure. But however, in my opinion, there are lots of gaps in this these domains. Still, Europe heavily depends on non-European cloud providers, AI platforms, because there are no huge AI, originally created and in EU AI platforms, chips manufacturing, or I would say hyperscale infrastructures. There are none. Europe heavily depends on third-party providers and platforms, etc. So there is also lots of fragmentation among the member states in implementation, investment capacity, and digital maturity. There are different huge gaps. Another major challenge is speed. Europe has a very successful in regulation, but when we come to successful in scaling on a global, I would say, technologically level, or boosting and creating digital champions, there is not very impressive results that we're facing now. So the next phase, in my opinion, should focus not only on regulating, but also on finding instruments to build strategic, industrial, and technological capabilities by funding and by measures and by liberating or giving opportunities for or boosting initiatives in Europe from startups to scale-ups to boosting even the scale by embracing by the European economies these initiatives that are created by the business. So in my opinion, these are the biggest challenges.
Shall I give my reading of some of the things the European Union has done which contribute towards, I think of it in terms of a safe, human-centered digital world is a contribution towards digital sovereignty, which is a bit kind of last generation talk for some of you maybe, but the whole normative framework which the European Union, inside the European Union, but also at the global level, has been I would argue, quite instrumental in establishing some of the principles. So the European Digital Charter Rights and Principles is something which is inspiring other regions all around the world. Now, the question then, of course, is like, okay, it's all very well having these principles, but how do we ensure that they're upheld? I've worked very intensively on the systemic risk framework under the Digital Services Act from a peace and conflict lens. And some of you will be very familiar with this, but the risk management framework basically says that we need to identify risks along lines like illegal content which is illegal, content which is harming civic discourse, content which is a threat to health of minors and gender-related violence, and for me, and content which is infringing fundamental rights. So if we think about, as I said at the outset, if digital sovereignty basically means the autonomy and the dignity of local communities, is it protected in a digital world? I think that the basic criteria of risk assessment, when it says fundamental rights, and the European Fundamental Rights Agency is here, I don't know if any of you are in the room, but we can see that these rights are very central in situations of war. The right to life is article number 1. So if you've got a war going on, whether it's kinetic or hybrid or whatsoever, lots of rights are being infringed. Now, what we did in Build Up, we know very well that if you can't measure and quantify the risks and the harms, it's very difficult to remedy them and to show mitigation. So we've worked particularly on polarization online, and we've got a metric where we can actually assess how much polarizing content is in different social media platforms. So that's a small kind of micro intervention which we think can feed into the risk management framework. And in this respect, we're hopeful that the same kind of logic will apply under the AI Act. And I'm not an expert on the AI Act, but as you've said, we can talk a lot about regulatory frameworks. But final thing that I want to say is like, I very much agree with what was said, that we need to also build things. So our organization is called Build Up for a reason, because we try to not only advocate and talk, but also do things. So it's absolutely central that we have to have tech products and tech solutions which are built according to the values and goals which we seek to achieve, whether we frame them as digital sovereignty or human-centered or safe, or however we want to frame that. But and that's where we get to the really complicated issue of how can we, whether it's Europe or peace builders or Global South or whoever it might be, what do we do when we're confronted with a tech world which is dominated by 3, 4, 5 key players, and the whole discussion of the stack, which there's been lots of discussion in this conference. There are certain parts of the stack which we cannot replicate inside Europe alone, but that doesn't mean we can't do anything. And then we get to this very interesting discussion about, can we repurpose things which are made for one purpose, for another purpose, and still maintain the integrity of our core goals and fundamental values, which I'd be very interested to have some further exchange on. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes?
Well, I think that my colleagues have been pretty elaborate and exhaustive, yet maybe there are certain aspects that I can complement. On the one hand, I think that it is also important to mention the open source that the European Commission is strongly encouraging through funding Horizon Europe projects, European Defence Fund, and so on. Maybe it doesn't come so directly at first, but if you think about it, all the measures that are being encouraged are actually facilitating the entire process and landscape and assisting in avoiding vendor lock-in practices. And this is really crucial. I absolutely agree with my colleagues. I think it was George in the beginning who mentioned the public procurement. Indeed, there are capital barriers for new market players, for not so big market players, new ones. And I couldn't agree more on the public procurement aspect, yet we also have to acknowledge the other actors which are also part of the World Trade Agreement. For example, Microsoft very often reminds about this document and all the responsibilities that the EU has under the agreement with regard to public procurement. So certainly not an easy topic as well. Too many sides, too many interests. But yes, public procurement is crucial as well. And finally, something I think that we haven't mentioned, but I think is equally important. Indeed, there is a huge framework of steps that have been taken in all spheres of life, both digital, legal, operational, technical, and so on and so forth. But what about auditability and enforcement? This is the other side of the coin. So a lot has been done, but maybe even more still has not been. So we have a lot of work to do.
Thank you so much, everyone. And now I just cannot not mention the initiative of the EU for the European AI factories, because they aim to do exactly this thing and to reduce the dependence of startups and SMEs from those hyperscalers and compute providers that are mainly non-EU. And yes, they're still developing those AI factories that are going to provide compute for free to startups. And maybe we see some progress there as well, but it's still on the way. Now we're moving to our last question before our Q&A, which is namely in the context of digital sovereignty, what is the importance of preparedness, mechanisms, exercises, simulations, and training infrastructures. And that's namely where our acting project comes in. And maybe it would be good to hear a brief introduction about it, and Polina can just briefly introduce you to the project. And for more the technical aspects, if you have questions about them, we'll be welcome to hear them afterwards.
Thank you, Daphne. To keep it really simple and short, what acting constitutes is actually a framework for improving cyber defense training and exercises efficiency. And it does so through different simulation use cases, namely in the field of land and naval forces, space and maritime, as well as critical infrastructure. Of course, I'm certainly not an expert in the field, but I have done research myself as well on this question, and I was very surprised to stumble upon the fact that EU-based secure cloud and AI computing services are missing currently, even for highly critical use cases, as European defense and critical infrastructure are. So I think that this pretty much exemplifies at what stage we are at the moment.
Certainly, and I think that such training infrastructures are very, very important for the future, especially for digital sovereignty, as they can create this preparedness, which would be easier to do than to just move on. Something happens and it's much harder to fix. And this is our last question. And namely, is this thing that we call digital sovereignty actually achievable for the European Union, considering everything that we talked about and the external influences as well? So maybe, Professor, you can start with this.
let's be fair. Complete digital sovereignty, in this absolute sense of this word, is probably neither realistic nor desirable. This is not real. The digital ecosystem is inherently global, interconnected, and interdependent. No region whatsoever, including Europe, nor United States, nor China, can be entirely, completely closed ecosystem, self-sufficient in every layer of the technological development. This is practically impossible. However, strategic digital sovereignty is achievable, not in the absolute sense of this word. So the global should not be total, the goal should be not total technological isolation, but rather reducing the critical dependencies, ensuring resilience. I would say maintaining control over key infrastructures and data, and preserving the ability to make independent political and economic decisions. These are the most important factors. In this sense, the digital sovereignty, in my opinion, is better understood as a continuum rather than binary condition, yes or no. There is no such thing. So Europe does not need to own every technological stack, but must be sovereign in strategically critical areas. I think that digital identity, cybersecurity, I would say critical cloud infrastructure, AI governance, in use of AI, and a secure data ecosystem. So Europe's, I would say, unique contribution may not be to dominate the digital world. This is unrealistic in my opinion. To dominate, I mean technologically to dominate, but to shape the digital model based on trust, democratic values, security, and human rights, of course. So, and in this increasingly unstable geopolitical situation, that model may become one of the most and biggest advantages of Europe as a strategy. So, this is something what I think.
I'd like to just pick up on the how do we have the tech then that's escaped from the current model of how tech is. So one of the reasons why Build Up is here at this event is because we're very fascinated by the whole proposition of Europe supporting open source, federated, public good, public interest internet, digital technologies, AI, and so on. We're still I think we're all still grappling with like, what does that mean? Is it possible? Can we get there? And so on. But certainly the promise seems to us to be extremely relevant to the whole peace tech idea, being that there's been a kind of history of peace building and technology, which began with this idea, tech is just there. We have these platforms or tools, whatever they are, and let's try and do content moderation and let's try and make it a little bit less bad. But I think that was a kind of the very first generation was the internet's fantastic, it's going to solve all humanity's problems and it's going to be all democratic and everything's going to be wonderful. So we were all there maybe 20 years ago, those of you old enough to remember that era. So the tech exuberance and the tech solutionists. Then it was like content moderation, there are some harms. Now we're much more in this build model. We have to build a different tech stack. I think that's what the digital sovereignty discussion is really fascinating about. Is it achievable? I mean, this is the gigantic question, which again, many of us are grappling with. What's the possibility of that happening? I mean, certainly from our narrow perspective of what our core interest is, do we have technology, as I said at the outset, is technology available for peace mediators, peace builders, and so on? I could say a lot about the, maybe I'll just finish this and then another comment I want to make. So I would definitely argue that, the European Union and its global aspirations of effective multilateralism and so on, has a very strong interest in what it does inside the European space, having a global relevance as well. And I would really underline the fact I think there are a lot of allies out there in Africa, in Brazil, in Indonesia, and so on, who are very aligned with the kinds of goals that we're hearing articulated here about we need digital sovereignty if we're going to survive in a time of war. I think that would resonate with many actors, both state and civil society, academic, scientific, and so on. And that the conclusion of that, we would escape from this. I mean, Anu Bradford's kind of model of like you have the US model and you have the Chinese model and where's Europe, and then she doesn't really look at, well, where's Brazil, where's Africa, where's Indonesia, where's Yemen in this. But I think that we have got a moment of possibility in front of us. But then I just want to quickly make a remark about the acting cybersecurity training work that you've presented, because I think it's really interesting to think about simulations and exercises and training about what kind of, and I would just really advocate that there's a lot of work done in terms of, I mean, there are a number of different clusters of things, like, for example, situational awareness and data analysis in times of war is a fascinating topic where there's a lot of need for us to have those kinds of tools and instruments available for civilians, not just for bad actors or military actors. So that's one thing I would say. Another is the whole AI possibility that, again, I don't want to fall into the category of like, oh, let's just ban AI because it's very scary and might lead to conflict. No, I mean, we definitely have a proposition that digital twins and scenario making and agentic AI, which can actually help open horizons and open possibilities that wouldn't otherwise be there, which can listen at scale, which can provide, let's imagine a kind of peace process with a track 1, track 2, track 3, that you would get much better, more granular data about the kind of pathways to peace which might actually stick and might resonate with local communities. So we have a lot to say about that kind of, what types of things should people be being trained in so that we have resilient democratic societies where we have good grasp of like possible futures and so on. I think that's a really interesting idea. Thank you.
I couldn't agree more. Actually, with regard to everything that my colleagues have already mentioned, very insightful and exhaustive. Just a very curious fact, maybe many of you are not aware of. At the end of 2025, so last year, there has been an actual declaration for European digital sovereignty signed by all EU countries. So this makes the entire concept very officialized, also on state level. So it's obvious where we're heading to with common effort. And yes, everything that we have mentioned with regard to this question, but also the entire panel discussion that we have been following pretty much reflects the logic behind the document. So it has paved the way, and a lot is still to be done.
Thank you so much to our panelists for this.
I just wanted to add something. I couldn't resist.
Go for it.
When speaking about the importance of preparedness, of education, of simulation, of exercises, I would say that this is a constant work. It's endless process. Why? Because the technologies, they evolve so quickly that they appear and die in few years, while they can do so much damage that people wouldn't have imagined this. Can you imagine what is the effect for the society, the losses from the so-called ransomware? You all heard about ransomware, the encrypted, the virus which encrypts, or cryptovirus, which, well, attacks target systems. They encrypt the data, and against the ransom, the criminals, they give you a key to unlock, to decrypt this. All the societies were affected. In Bulgaria, government institution has paid ransom. One of the high courts. Unbelievable how it can affect the society. You cannot fight the normal ways. Why it happened? Because there was no enough cyber resilience measures knowledge, understanding, and preparedness of the society. That's the reason. Nowadays, let's see, it's a very beautiful other initiatives to bring to Europe, the remote identification for banking. I don't want to exit my office. I want to open a bank account remotely. There is video identification by the bank. It's fully remote. You speak with another person, and then appears AI with such a power that it can even can stream into video a fully responsive human-like avatar that can completely cheat the video operator, which is a human, that is a human. Or I've seen when two avatars spoke to each other, one of them couldn't understand that the other one, AI avatars, that the other one is not a human. So this happens today, and we have lots of losses. Why? Because there is not good preparedness, there is not good simulations, there is not good knowledge about how to treat these new realms. And they appear and disappear literally in months, some of them in years. So how to challenge, how the society would embrace this challenge is something, a constant, I would say, it's a constant effort and due diligence. So this is something that in acting was meant to, but it's not one-off shot. It's a constant effort that society should put. So preparedness, yes. Simulations, yes. Mechanism for bringing knowledge and education, yes. Constantly. So training, of course. So this is something that is the biggest challenge. Thanks. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much. Or in other words, we have to keep up with technologies. But thank you. Now we can open the floor for a Q&A. I see some hands, but I think that on the last row there was the first one. So we can start. Thank you.
Hi, I just have a super quick question. If you have any recommendations of technology that you could introduce into your tech stack for digital sovereignty. The reason I ask this question is I'm quite interested by the case study in October 2025, where the International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor lost his Microsoft emails while he's doing groundbreaking work documenting war crimes during a genocide conducted by Israel. So that was quite phenomenal, and it led to the decision by the European Union to move towards digital sovereignty. So I just wanted to ask, do you have any recommendations where they move from Microsoft to OpenDesk? Any other introductions to your tech stack that would also be great alternatives to big tech?
Thank you so much for your question. I would say that indeed the Microsoft Outlook case was really an evidence of what could happen to Europeans, especially with the chief prosecutor, and that his work basically stopped because of this. It's very sad. But the acting project in itself is creating a training platform, so it's not really a stack which could be added and replace a hyperscaler like Microsoft at this stage. Of course, it's still developing, and it's very good to hear such opinions on this matter even, and suggestions on what can be done in the future for our training platform indeed. But maybe at the end we also have a QR code with the contact points of José, Professor José, who is supposed to be here. He's a technical expert, so maybe you can reach out also to him to ask this question, but thank you.
And sorry, can I just very quickly jump in? And actually, in this train of thought, it is very, I don't know whether you are aware, but there has been this procedure for establishing European cybersecurity certification scheme. So it hasn't gone that far yet. I'm mentioning this with regard to the sovereign cloud, obviously. And they couldn't agree even on the requirements for what sovereign cloud means. So we're certainly at all there in the entire union. Yeah.
Just a short remark on this question. I mean, I think it's really turbocharged the discussion, no? And it's really interesting, as somebody who works primarily in Global South, that things that we've been saying for a long time didn't really seem to register. Now there's this like, if it happens to us, then we better get something done. And I think that what we're very interested in is certification. So it's very difficult right now. There's an example there, but the kinds of I don't want to call them consumers, the peace-building actors that we're working with in Sudan are very like, can I trust this? Well, am I going to be switched off? And all this kind of data blackouts and so on, who actually controls this data? So sovereign means something very different for them, yeah? But the basic idea, that's why we're super interested about the discussion about federated open source and so on, which comes with another set of risk analysis type problems. But I think it's a really... as I say, yeah, that debate is really very important, and I think that the alternative products, and I mean there are the platforms, what's it called, EUalternatives.eu, you can see lots of different types of products are out there, but we find as a peace building organization, can we really assure our partners that these are safe? It raises another set of questions. So, but yeah, absolutely important point.
Yes, and actually, even experts are quite polarized on this topic, because some argue for cloud providers being headquartered within the EU, whilst others argue for the certification scheme. But then, of course, comes the auditability question. So even there is no consensus on this yet at all. And then, of course, we have the hyperscalers representatives, which encourage for the open market. So it's very fragmented.
Thank you. I think we have a lot more questions. So, yes?
Yes, here, Jaime Bernal, researcher at Utrecht University. So I just wanted to comment on the issue of trying to reach the low-hanging fruits, right? I was in an interview with the Amsterdam chief scientific officer, and she was complaining that before COVID, they were using Zoom, and after COVID, they were using Teams, and now they want to get rid of Microsoft, which you can call also micro slop, you know, like AI slop. That's the issue. So start with those things, like, right? And then regarding cloud, I mean, of course, yeah, the EUCS, of course, there are providers, Nextcloud, OVS Cloud in France, and so on. Then there is the issue of nationalities and so on, but those are capable of holding certain types of data. Maybe not trained models, so it has to be on a like efficiency scale, right, and so on. But for critical data, of course, I think that they are capable. And also regarding the systems, Linux is a good system for open source and so on, and it should be studied a little bit more by the European Commission. Yeah, just wanted to give those remarks. Thank you.
Go for it.
Well, thanks for this remark. I will briefly comment on it. It's the typical misunderstanding that the digital sovereignty means to actually remove using or stop using technologies that are available nowadays. This is going from one of the parts to the other side, you know, by the first signal, let's say, decision. Let's remove the problem by removing the technology. Why? Actually it's an example of how not to do that. Well, you can achieve this, but this is not the solution. Why not using technologies based on proper, let's say, measures, by peer-to-peer encryption, by the possibility of I would say, policies on how to use these technologies. Policies which require measures from the organizations. Taking those measures requires good planning and requires, of course, good knowledge of the users of these systems. But this should be the efforts put onto not to stop using technologies that are created in the United States or in China. This is nonsense, in my opinion. But of course, it's a question of, again, of decision making of the different organizations. But what you show as example is example how not to do things, in my opinion. Sorry.
Yeah, maybe I just super quickly, I wanted to say something about your remark. Indeed, we have European alternatives, but in my opinion, based on interviews that I have done on this exact matter before with startups, what they have told me before, yes, we have those European alternatives, but we are so locked into those cloud providers that it's impossible for us to move our architecture. Thank you. Yes, the next question, please. Yes, here.
I'm going to speak as an European citizen here, and to be frank, I'm a bit concerned by the discussion here because sovereignty is absolutely critical, obviously. And what I don't see in the debate here is, and there is an assumption that there is agreement on what is sovereignty, and there's an agreement on the threat model, and there's an agreement on how we need to prioritize different things to achieve different objectives. And obviously, the answer to this question is very different if you live in the Baltic, where you say, whoa, wait a second, right? For me, part of sovereignty is that I have a data embassy where my data is in Luxembourg. So if that tanks come from the East, I can have a government in exile and still have the state data somewhere else. Obviously, if you live in a different country, in Spain, the threat model is different. So my part of the concern here is that the implicit assumption here today was that there is agreement on the problem, and of course everybody wants to be sovereign. But I think unless we are serious and elevate the debate by looking at what is the threat model, what are the serious threats, what are the things that we decide to take the risk, where do we prioritize, where are we okay as a society to pay the cost of building certain things and taking the pain of building that thing, we are going to fool ourselves, right? By trying to reach full sovereignty across everything, which is unachievable, and take shortcuts like, simplification, that's going to lead us nowhere in terms of reducing our dependencies. So I think there is a very important need to go to a less pleasant discussion, right? Because if you ask me, do you want to be sovereign? Of course I want to be sovereign. Do I want to be healthy? Of course. But then I go to the doctor and say, oh, you want to be healthy, but you have to do sport. And maybe you need to drink a bit less, and maybe you shouldn't smoke. And say, well, wait a second, right? If I drink less, I don't see my friends. Well, I'm going to keep drinking a bit, but I do more exercise. It's all about trade-offs. It's all about risks. And I haven't heard much about that thing. And I think we have to elevate the debate at that more difficult problem, which requires political decision, trade-offs, and assessment of the different risks. Otherwise, we're all going to fool ourselves. We're going to spend time making decisions about technology and things like that that are going to bring nothing at the end.
Thank you. Yes, please. Okay. Well, yes, of course, with digital sovereignty, there is not yet a definition on which is commonly accepted by everyone.
Directly say there's not a single definition. The answer is it's going to depend. It's going to depend over time. It's going to depend on who you are, your country, your situation, because the threat model is not the same. Your ability to invest, your decision about which risk you want to take and not is going to be different. And if we look for a single definition of sovereignty and a single solution, we are not going to get where we need to be. That's my message. And of course, it's a lot more complex question, but there is no other way that we get to that level of granularity. That's my view.
Okay. I'm going to have to leave a little early because I've got something I urgently have to do. But I think there's another elephant in the room, which is the economic model, which is also something you can think about in terms of trade-offs. Mm-hmm. So, I was going to say something maybe positive that the European Commission, for example, funds some of our work. So this is fantastic. We're very pleased if we can get some funding to do some small things, but they're very incremental, little, tiny, small things. And I think that this whole discussion about what do we do about an economic model, which is leading to, you talked about ransomware. Mm-hmm. And the organization What to Fix has a very interesting set of studies about monetization of ads online by criminality. And I was in a seminar with them yesterday, and what they've identified is that there's a whole architecture now of pay to disrupt people who put out a lot of polarizing content, propaganda, so on and so, but they have no malign intent. They just want to earn the money. Now, one of the consequences that we might see coming down the road is that this will be kind of clamped down, tightened, and then they will lose their funding revenues. But then they will be disruptors for hire. And who will hire them? Bad actors, malevolent actors who want to undermine our societies or Sudanese society, Yemeni society. So then we need to have some kind of decommissioning of these giant scam centers in Myanmar, whatever it is. And that's something where all these negative externalities of the way that the current big tech model is functioning fall on us, the citizens, if you like, or the poor war-affected communities in wherever. And I think that's where we have to be. Yes, it's good if there's a small amount of funding for some civil society initiatives to do with peace tech. I'm happy, but I think that that doesn't get to the much harder discussion about the trade-offs, about like what kind of digital economy do we think is appropriate? And if we don't think the model we have is appropriate, which we'll probably have many different views in this room, but what do we then do and how do we have that discussion? So I think that's how I kind of would kind of ally a bit to what you're saying. But a really sorry apology that I have to rush now.
Yes, we
Excuse
can.
me.
Yes.
Maybe I'm not relevant in the room, but can we really reach digital sovereignty in wartime when our armed forces, or there are no investments to make them digitally sovereign?
True. Yeah.
Yes, thanks for the remark. I think that's it. It's a big elephant in the room for this. But as we discussed, the EU is trying to do something about the alternatives, but it's yet to be researched if those alternatives are gonna they're gonna be sustainable. Yes.
Yeah, who would have thought that the world will be driven by drones? Who would have thought that? Who would have thought that the war will be driven by disinformation or by attacking critical infrastructures, cyber attacks? Who would have thought that? It's a few years ago, who would have thought that? Couldn't agree more with your comment. It's something that still need to evolve, still need to develop. It's not something that is fully strict, known, understood, and there are, appeal for everything. There is no. Let's face that. There are lots of policies in different sectors how to achieve certain level of cyber resilience, or in a more common sense, in a more broad sense, digital sovereignty. But there is no such concept as full digital sovereignty. There is no such. So couldn't agree more. It's something that is a constant evolving react of the society through its political bodies against these situations, especially when speaking about wars.
Maybe one last question we can take with the time, and then we will be still here for the rest of the questions. So yes, thank you. Thank you, yes.
So,
Yes, please.
okay, very quickly then. Tiago from VB. It's not the elephant in the room, but I was curious since it was mentioned about also the role that simulations can have, and we know that's a lot of issues related to cybersecurity and cyber warfare. I was curious if you've seen somehow these initiatives and this push for the sandboxes coming also into play here, and how effective that's happening, because most of the time when people mention about sandbox, they are thinking always about market-driven solutions. I'm not saying that also in this context they will not be, but what I was curious is this becoming part of the discussion? Are you seeing this being part of the discussion of digital sovereignty and cybersecurity matters?
Thank you for the question. I think the training platform that we have, maybe Polly can also jump in for this, but it's very different from the regulatory sandboxes that we see, for example, from the AI Act and others, because there something is being tested. And with the training platform, the idea is more that it trains people on some certain, but Paulina maybe can confirm
Yes,
with this. Yes.
Absolutely, yes. It's predominantly engaged with cyber defense trainings and exercises. So, an interesting question indeed, an aspect that we haven't thought about, but no, definitely not in this context.
And yes.
Thank you. I am Fiaka, and I am an advanced master student in Leiden University. And I wanted to put the attention a bit on non-EU countries in Europe, in the Balkans. Not specifically like wartime, but we know some frozen conflicts in the region. And all of them aspire to be part of EU. They also get funded by EU. My question is, just given like the very frequent attacks, cyber attacks from Russia, Iran, to those countries, and not only these two, should the EU develop maybe like stronger cybersecurity cooperation with them, or like other protection mechanisms that are not like EU member exclusive, especially given that those regions maybe struggle with capacities and funding on this, and also, in a way, they are part of EU because they are on that road. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much for the question. I think it's super, super interesting to think about this. I have personally also thought about this before. And yes, we're geographically on the same place, not the same membership status, of course. But I believe that I can give some examples of when, for example, a non-EU member state has been included in such initiatives. For example, with the AI factories, we can see Turkey as one of the consortium members of, not sure which AI factory exactly, but yeah, they're still included in some matters, especially if it's for EU-funded programs. But when it comes to laws, the candidate member states, which are in the Balkans, especially the Western Balkans, they still have to start including EU law, no matter what it is about, such as cybersecurity law or something else, into their national laws before they fully become a member state. So in some sort of a way, we still have this, yeah, exactly.
Yes.
But much more can be done about this. So yeah, maybe in the future this happens too. Thank you. It's a very interesting question.
I can go without microphone. So I'm Mila Ilieva, and I'm the executive director of Law and Internet Foundation. So this is part of our team, and I'm so thankful to all of you for the presence and for the questions and for the great discussions. And just to wrap up, consider that we're an NGO, Bulgarian, part of the European Union, but also part of the Balkans. Regarding to your question, we've been consulting the Balkan region on their free entry to the European Union. We've seen a very good example with the synchronization of North Macedonia with their laws to the European directives much more in advance. They're not even yet part of the European Union, but they have synchronized their laws even prior to Bulgaria. Professor Josh Dimitrov was part of the team which consulted them. But regarding the elephant in the room and everything that you mentioned, we have to be apolitical, we have to be very diplomatic. An example is that in the past 10 years, we had about 10 governments in our country, and we as an NGO have to work with all of them. We work on projects funded by the European Commission. So excuse the fact that we are a little bit careful with how we present things and how we act. Of course, this is a fantastic forum for discussions. We agree with all of you. It's fantastic that we have this discussion and raising questions. So yeah, I think our time has finished. Thank you so much once again on behalf of my team.
Thank you.